we end up at the top of every list.
I'm here with Tracy Chadwell, founding partner of 1843 Capital, and we're going to talk about her career overview, and then dive it into 1843 Capital, what the focus is, why she went from the different parts of her career that she did, and then kind of finishing today's vlog with women in finance, and just kind of unpackaging that whole topic.
When I decided to launch the fund a couple of years ago, the first thing that my attorney said is finding a name is going to be the most difficult thing that you're going to do. And I did not believe her at all. I thought, clearly there's a lot of other issues that are hurdles that are going to be much harder. But it really was true. It was really hard to find a name. And so I think when you're starting a business or starting a new firm, you have to be really thoughtful about that and try to find something that you can trademark, because you don't want to put a lot of brand equity into a name and then have someone turn around and send you a cease and desist letter. Not something that we're probably going to do. We're not going to stop people. There is someone who has a very similar name to ours, but you do want to make sure that you have that done. It's relatively inexpensive and worthwhile. And 1843, by the way, is an interesting story. It's the year that Ada Lovelace wrote the first computer program.
Ada Lovelace
Yes.
wrote the first computer program.
Yes. Ada Lovelace was Lord Byron's only legitimate daughter. So it has a wonderful historical story to it. She grew up with her mother, and Lord Byron had left her, and he was quite the lover in England. And the mother decided that she didn't want her daughter to grow up with sort of the same proclivities that Lord Byron had. So she only let her study the STEM programs. So she studied things in science and technology at the time, and math. And she found poetry and numbers. And so she decided that, I think there's something that we can do with what's called the analytical engine, which was considered to be one of the first computers. And she said, I think if we do these punch cards that Charles Jacquard was doing for tapestries at the time, that he was doing, he had a lot of orders for the tapestries, he had to find out how to mass produce them, and he did it with punch cards. If we transfer that and use these to solve problems on the analytical engine, that became the first computer program. I always say, if Ada had been funded, who knows where we'd be, right? Well, it was really interesting because it was so really bloody difficult to find a name for this firm. Everything that I found was already taken by someone else. And we've gotten to this point where it's really hard to get a domain name, obviously. Yeah. So to find a name that wasn't taken and I could get the domain, we ended up with a number because numbers really hadn't been used, and I wanted to find something that was personally meaningful and significant for the firm. But then also an added benefit, which I thought of afterwards, is that we end up at the top of every list. So we're at the top of every women in VC list. We're at the top.
And every conference.
Yes, at the conferences, we're always at the top of the list. For a list of all the general VCs, we end up at pretty near the top of the list. There are a few firms with numbers, but
that's cool. Let's rewind. Where are you from? What's the story?
I'm from a small town in Illinois called Rockford, Illinois, and it's 90 miles northwest of Chicago. And I grew up in a family of attorneys, and so I was sort of given the guidance that early on that going into legal work and to trust in estates was probably my destiny. And I went to law school and ended up passing the bar exam and deciding that I really, really didn't want to practice law. I started working for a merchant banking firm in Chicago that was called SCM International, and I knocked on the door cold to get into this firm. So Crane's Chicago Business had published an article that the firm was starting up. It was former Senator Adlai Stevenson, who was a two-term senator from Illinois, who was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Mm-hmm. And it was also a guy named Tak Matsunaga, who was the head of a Japanese bank in Chicago, and then Dale Colling, who was an attorney. And they had come together to form this merchant bank. And I'd read about it, and I thought that this is really interesting. And so I just called up the number, because we made phone calls in that day, and asked them if I could come in and meet. And they said, sure, why don't you come in? And I went and I sat down, and I had previously, when I was in law school, I had worked in Japan and developed Japanese language ability. And so they were doing cross-border work between the United States and Asia, given that Adlai Stevenson was then the head of the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Commission. So I said, I'd love to work for you. I have a great skill set. And they said, well, that's really nice, Tracy, but we're not hiring any lawyers. And I said, well, are you hiring for anything? And they said, yeah, we need a receptionist. And I said, well, I'll take it. It was a tough time. Not a lot of law firms were hiring. They'd cut their hiring practices down from, say, 100 new associates to 25. So it was really hard to get a job at that point. Plus, also, too, I really thought that international transactional work on the business side, because that's really where my affinity is, was what I wanted to do. So I was willing to do actually just about anything to get into the space that I wanted to be in. They offered me $27,000 a year. What they didn't know is if they hadn't offered me that job, I was going to offer to work for free, just to get my foot in the door and get some experience. I was able to pull it off. I just wanted to learn. I wanted to absorb everything, and I highly recommend that to anyone especially anyone who's struggling to enter into a new field. No one's going to pay you if you don't know. So you've got to jump in and do some things for free and just spend some time, as much as you can afford. Maybe if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but that way you start to make relationships and you start to get experience. So once I was in the door of this firm, and besides, actually too, I should note that even though that's a cute story about starting as a receptionist, I did negotiate with them that I would be the receptionist, but only for 6 months. That after that I would move back into an office and I would start to work on deals, which did happen. And it was very funny because Adelaide, the day that I moved back, he looked at me and goes, Tracy, what are you doing back here? So,
remember 6 months ago we had this?
It's 6 months. But one of the really interesting things about being a receptionist and having that experience is it really developed empathy on my part for all the different roles that people play in an organization. And I would go home at night and I would hear the phone ringing in my head, because every time that I would go to grab a cup of coffee or do something that was off the desk or go to talk to someone, if the phone rang, I had to run back and make sure that I got that, because it was the main line that was coming in and then distributed to all the partners. So I was living in fear all the time that I would miss a call, and I would go home and I couldn't get to sleep sometimes because I would hear that ringing.
What advice do you have for people who don't know what industry, who don't know what function?
Think about what they loved in high school. What you love in high school and what you're attracted to. That, and then another thing that was sort of interesting to me and why I do spend quite a bit of time helping women founders and women, because you also have to, if there's something that makes you emotional, if you're watching something on TV or if you're thinking about something and you sort of get, if you tear up a little bit or you really feel it strongly, that's the direction you should go.
That's a nudge to go.
Yeah, because then you will power through if you believe and you feel something. And so it's exciting for me at this point in my career to be able to do that, to be sort of a bridge to capital for people who have not had the opportunity. Life is a spiral staircase that you're kind of building on and circling back to things that are in your past. I haven't used my Japanese language ability in a really long time, and I sort of would think to myself, oh, that's just part of my career. But interestingly enough, now we have a thesis within my firm around technology for the aging, and 25% of the population in Japan is over 65, and it's where a lot of the technology innovation is coming. And I have relationships now with assisted living facilities that are in Japan. We're going to be making between 12 and 14 investments in this fund that we have.
What fund are you on?
1843 Capital Ventures LP. It's our first fund that we've had. And so we focus on cybersecurity, but we also focus on the technology for the aging. So we'll make those investments through our investment vehicle.
So cybersecurity, enterprise software,
Yep.
and silver tech.
Yes, technology for the aging.
Awesome.
Yep. So the very first inkling of the fund, I actually have an interesting story that is pretty unique for venture capital in that I took time off. So I was a stay-at-home mom. I was home for a while raising my 2 children in a suburb of New York, and it's really hard for women to get back into the workforce. And a very interesting statistic is that the largest growing demographic of people in the workforce right now is women over 55. They're raising their children and they're starting to return. And there's a lot of really interesting new technology companies that are helping women do that. There's return ships at a lot of the investment banks that are trying to find ways to bring women back. But it's really, really hard to come back and people say, oh, you haven't worked a little bit. But, I was learning all kinds of different skill sets like management. So I would say about 2 years ago, I had been investing on my own account. I think it's probably close to 8 years ago now when I started to do that, because that was something that I could do while the kids were home. I could still be investing. I could still all day long be researching companies. I could come into New York, I could meet with companies and make investments. And
On an angel's side?
yes, yeah, on a smaller on my own balance sheet, absolutely. And my portfolio turned out to be really terrific. I have great return on capital. So I decided it was probably either time for me to go back to work or to start my own firm. And through the process of talking to people, venture capital is such a discrete, small industry. And a lot of times partners are grown up within the firm. It's very hard to make a lateral move as a partner. And I left as a partner. I was a partner of Baker Capital when I sort of retired. It was in 2003, so after my second son was born. It seemed to be, number one, a real opportunity because there was this really inefficient market in women founders because they were getting 2% of venture capital dollars. So if I was out there trying to compete with all the 800 venture capital firms that were out there, I would have a lot of trouble sourcing deal flow. But with women founders, it was the opposite. I was getting more deal flow than I could ever imagine and really had some really interesting opportunities. By the time I really jumped in, they weren't dormant anymore because there was news that women weren't getting funding, and capital is readily available to accelerate women founders. You have a lot of accelerators that are focused in the space. You have a lot of mentorship programs. So there's a lot of corporate philanthropy dollars that go into this, but the missing piece was the actual equity into the companies. There weren't any dollars flowing in to the companies themselves. There's lots there to set up these organizations to mentor them, but then not to actually fund them. So I was able to get into a lot of really interesting female-founded companies, even as a small check, and was extremely successul. So then I started to say, well, does it make sense for me to go back and work for a firm? That just didn't seem to be the right path for me because there weren't too many lateral hires going in. Even though I had exited the business as a partner with Baker Capital, there weren't opportunities to join a firm as a partner. So I decided, you know what, I think the most interesting thing for me to do would be to start my own firm. And it's, at the time, there were just a handful of women who were starting firms. This is just a couple of years ago. Now there's been a few more. By our count, the ones that have a female founder, and I'm not including firms that may have 2 or 3 or 4 male partners and a 5th female partner. I'm talking about founded. But started it is 30 out of 800. So there's just a few of us, really. A lot of them have been founded in the last 10 years. There really weren't any. There was Starvest, I think, may have been the only one before. Now the fact that you're even seeing any at all is a wonderful thing, and I think it's because, first of all, some women have grown up through the ecosystem, so a handful of us were associates and principals and then became partners. So that we do have the expertise and the experience to start our own firms at this point. Before that, I have a long track record and experience in this business, and I think it's a little bit tougher to do if you're just starting out, if you only have 2 years at a firm or something like that. So we are seeing some of the women with experience now having the ability to raise their own firms. I also think there's interest amongst the limited partners, among the state pension funds and things that are now looking to back women fund managers, which is a great thing. Because we have a different mindset and we have different eyes, and we're going to fund different things.
Generally speaking, first-time fund, focus on Series A, from people who might have 10 plus years at brand name. Like, what does that size of fund typically look like?
So we have heard that anything over 2 million is good. Our fund size is 12.2, and there are a handful of people that have been able to raise a $100 million fund, but anywhere in the middle, whatever you can raise, because it's really hard to raise capital, and then go out and construct a really interesting diversified portfolio. So we are targeting between 12 and 14 investments. Right now we currently have 6 companies in our portfolio. Because of my partner's background in cybersecurity, she was a successful founder in the cybersecurity space and sold her company to Deloitte. She also had M&A exits and an IPO under her belt as a senior manager. We are focusing on cybersecurity. We also are focusing on something that I have found a really interesting market opportunity in the aging space. So I call that silver tech, because I like to encompass the positive aspects of it and not call it elder tech, which I think has just sort of a little bit more of a negative feel to it. And we focus on the health, wealth, and betterment of self for the aging population. 10,000 people are turning 65 every day. So of those companies, we do have some B2B SaaS companies, but we also do have some cyber and some 2 investments in the transportation space, because the first thing that we wanted to go after was the issue of transporting people who are elderly, because they get to a point where they cannot drive themselves even though they're perfectly healthy, or maybe just don't want to drive themselves. And of course there's transportation needs within the campuses of assisted living facilities as well. One of our interesting and very accessible companies, I think, for people to think about is a company called Hop Skip Drive, which we just invested in a few months ago. And this is a terrific company run by CEO Joanna McFarlane. She's done a terrific job of providing care drivers, and that's a specialized level driver. So that's not your Uber driver who could be kind of a sketchy, sketchy guy. And most of them are guys, quite frankly. And I know a lot of my girlfriends say that they feel uncomfortable taking an Uber, and they certainly wouldn't put their daughter in an Uber. So to have this organization that is care drivers, 90% of Joanna's drivers are women. So first of all, there's a sort of an added sense of security there. Not that women aren't criminals or can't do something awful, but to increase the security layer, she does have them fingerprinted, and she has continuous background checks. They're based in Los Angeles, and it's very interesting because
how many drivers do they have?
Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you right now because it's growing all the time. But I want to say that they did over 250,000 rides last year. So.
And what does that type of ride look like? Like, when would somebody use it?
So the reason that they want a care driver is if you're transporting someone who has a little bit of an extra special need, and that would be, a child under the age of 18, which actually it's not in the business model of Uber or Lyft to drive those children. And in fact, if your child has an Uber app on their phone and they're under 18, they had to check a box saying that they were 18, which is quite frankly fraud. So they're not insured to carry children, and the drivers aren't allowed to. So this will allow people to send their children to, hey, I've got 3 kids going, one's going to soccer practice and one's going to hockey practice. How do I get them to these places? This is a perfect solution for that. It's also for the elderly, somebody maybe who needs to be walked into a doctor's appointment or have someone stay with them. Yeah. So that can be done. It can be done on a billed basis rather than a per minute basis. And then what's really interesting is she has an enterprise level business as well, where she services school districts to help with transporting at-risk and foster children to their schools. What's interesting too is I think I mentioned that the fastest growing demographic for people returning to the workforce is women over 55.
Yeah.
So this gives women a quick way to make some money right away. One of the things I love about Joanna's model is that you have to be a driver, you have to have 5 years of caregiving experience. And being a mom for 5 years counts. I look at this as a great added benefit to women that are working because they need to organize their children and their aging parents to get places. A woman who's working maybe can't leave at 3 o'clock to go pick up her child from school or to take her mother to a doctor's appointment. So this is a really nice resource. Globally speaking, it's incredibly competitive out there right now. It's never been easier to start a business. And it's never been a time when you could start a business with less capital, because everything is cloud-based now, because you don't even need an office. You can walk around with your laptop and a phone and start a business. Yeah. So what we've seen, and through the proliferation of accelerator programs, we've seen a lot of companies grow up. There is no shortage of companies, period. There's certainly no shortage of female-founded companies. What the big problem is there's a shortage of capital to grow those companies. And with 98% of capital still going to male-founded companies, that leaves 2%. And it's not just deals, it's also the deal size. So maybe a female founder does get investment, but she gets $1 million instead of $2 million. So McKinsey has done a tremendous amount of research in this space, and then also Mass Challenge and BCG have done a comparative analysis of the portfolio companies that come through Mass Challenge, and found that a lot of times that the female founders are much more efficient with their capital and outperform. There's also data, Crunchbase every year puts out a big analysis of all the female-founded companies too. You know, rightly so, everything is driven by metrics, and it's difficult to really put metrics around this. What are you trying to achieve, and how are you trying to achieve that goal? And I think first and foremost, and rightly so, with institutional investors, their number one priority is return on capital. And so they are not trying to achieve parity in funding. That's not their mandate. So one of the things that our firm has decided to do is that we do not have a mandate to exclusively invest in female founders. And other people see things differently, but it's our position that in order to be effective around a certain investment thesis, you have to look at all the portfolio companies in that space. And we just consider it one of the boxes that we check when we have metrics for investment. One of the things we look at is the team diverse? Do we have diversity? Because we like diverse teams, we like diversity of thought. We think it leads to a better outcome and better financial return. But we want to be able, if we've developed a thesis around transportation and we find that the very best company in this space has a male CEO, which we did, May Mobility, which does have a co-founder who's a woman, we would not withhold our investment because of that. And I think that backing female fund managers will help because we have a different eye, because we recognize different problems. We're looking at companies in the menopause space right now. It's a tremendous opportunity. That may be something that, I'm not gonna put any judgment, but maybe some of the male VCs don't quite understand as well, So that's something that maybe I might see and I might have a little more empathy about when I'm looking at some of these companies and understand, and probably better at to analyze them.
Yeah. How did your experience in Japan kind of shape who you are?
I think it told me that
and you were there during 1 year of law school, or?
Yes, I was there for a year. Yes, while I was in law school, I actually took some time off and went to law school. I'm not afraid to take a risk and to jump in to do something interesting. We were in a recessionary period. As I mentioned before, it was really tough for me to get my first job. But before that, even then, it was tough to get an summer associate's position. And so I was lucky enough to get a summer associate's position with a law firm in Tokyo. And so then I was having such an interesting time that I decided to push off my law school just a little bit. But then I went and completed my degree and passed the bar. It was fantastic because it really taught me that people think differently. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we like diverse teams so much, is because we recognize that different ways of looking at the world is really interesting and can be complementary and collaborative. I mean, I don't want to be cute, but I don't feel like any risk I've ever taken didn't work out. I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but really, when one door closes, another door opens. And back to when I was saying your career is sort of a spiral staircase that may not be going in the same direction, and you may feel like you've headed off in one direction and it's a complete dead end. You're learning lessons from that. And guess what? You're not going to repeat them again. And maybe you had to go down that path to learn that lesson, to be a stronger and more effective manager or builder of a firm or whatever it is that you'd like to do. I guess maybe we could say it was taking a risk to leave my job as a partner in a major billion-dollar firm and to raise my children. And that was a huge risk. I think one of the biggest things is that on 9/11, I was supposed to speak at a venture capital breakfast at Windows in the World. And they called twice. They asked me to do it. I said, I don't think so. They called back again a week before and said, Tracy, we really need you to do this. We need a woman on the panel. Can you please do this for us? And I was about 7 months or 8 months pregnant with my first son. And it was a really hot summer. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that one of the reasons I didn't want to go down is I was too hot. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then it was at 8:30 in the morning. My son and I would have been lost. I think that sort of readjusted my priorities. And what I found was really valuable to me at the time. And so then with the second son, we decided that the best thing to do would be to move to the suburbs. And my husband and I looked at each other and we said, we can't have our children in another state, while we're working. And so I made the choice to be the person that would stay at home. And I was miserable from the second I decided to do it. I wouldn't take back that time because it was really important for my children's development, and it was a choice that I made, but I was really, really unhappy. So then when I was able to find the ability to invest myself, that was just a godsend. It was a life rope. I tried everything else in the interim, running the fundraisers for the school and gut renovating a house, but nothing really did it for me. This is my true passion and where I belong.
What was your daily cadence like? You have your morning rush, everyone's up at 6:30, kids are out at 7:30, and then from 9 till whenever the kids come home.
Yeah, I put them on the bus at 7:15, and it was really back to transportation. Thank God I had a school bus right around the corner. So I could put my boys on the bus in the morning, they would go to school, and then they would get dropped off at 4:30 in the afternoon, and they could walk from the bus to home. And so, if occasionally I had a few meetings that would run over and I wouldn't be home till 5:30 or 6 or so, the boys were there and they were fine. And it was great to be able to pack things into those. I think, I had like 7 or 8 hours during the day that I could do something for myself.
On a related topic, how can I be a better husband? You went through that stage with your family, being partner level. What are some ways that you think I could be a better husband?
I think it's just sort of universal advice for everyone, and this is so simple. Look people in the eyes. Look your wife in the eyes, look your children in the eyes. If you're speaking to them and you're upstairs and they're downstairs and you're yelling at them, I just think that human connection is so important. And if we can just look each other in the eyes and share presence for a few minutes, that's better than just about anything else you can do.
Look them in the eyes.
Yeah.
How to be a better husband.
If you're talking to her and you look her in the eyes, you'll sense things that maybe you wouldn't have if you were distracted looking at your emails while you're talking.
Yeah, so much of our interaction in the past 3 years has been, I'll be at our plastic table as my desk for 3 years.
Right.
And she might be on the couch, working, and I'm over here, and then we're talking about things, but still cranking out work, until 2 a.m. or whatever it is.
Right.
But even that time of, okay, kids asleep, it's 9 p.m., let's just spend 5 minutes, like, how have you been?
Yeah.
Very good advice.
Yeah.
Word of the wise. God, this is free too.
I think that the biggest thing that is really important, that has really been a governor for my life, and I think is important for a lot of women to remember, is that you have to get rid of fear. Fear is a bad boyfriend. You have to kick him to the curb. It has no place in anyone's life or career. And I think we have all this cortisol and all this rush and all this fear of things that is innate in us as human beings from when we had to run from being chased by an animal that was going to kill us. Nobody's chasing us anymore. And you just have to get over fear of going to ask for something or fear of starting something. I mean, I'm not saying that you should throw caution to the wind and you're $100,000 in debt, and instead of taking a job to build some capital, you go and start joining a circus or something like that. I think that what I'm talking about is not having any fear of making plans and not having any fear of asking people to help you, because I think 80% of people really do want to help you. Right, absolutely. But with that too, I think one of the biggest things about the fear is fear of rejection. And what I've done is I've changed my definition of win. So if there's a company that I'm really interested in pursuing, and I find a way to get to them, and I don't have any fear about contacting them at all. And I think about, well, if I talk to this and they're not interested in my capital for whatever reason, or maybe they're too far along, what other thing could I win? Maybe I could win some advice for a company that I already have in my portfolio, or maybe I could win a connection for them. Or there's all kinds of other, when you're talking to interesting people, and I think, well, every person is interesting, they're going to bring other aspects to your life. So if you define it by, okay, if I'm going and seeking funding as a founder and I go to a VC and I don't get the funding, I didn't win, so I walk by and I'm disappointed, I'm never going to approach another founder or VC again. That's bananas, because we're sitting there and we have a lot of life experience and a lot of investment experience. We've seen a lot of things. We can kind of give you a little bit of guidance of which way to go, and you should consider that a win. So why would you want to back away from that? Why would you be afraid of it?
What is your one request of the Series A or just general VC community out there?
Do not please use biz dev software to target me. There is nothing that upsets me more, because I have so little time. I'd want to spend it with, helping my founders or sourcing new deal opportunities. The last thing I want to do is open up an email that was generated by a biz dev software that says, hey, VC investor, I haven't heard from you in a while, or all these like sort of malicious jokes that those sort of algorithms use to try to get you to respond. And it's been incredibly frustrating for me.
All right, Tracy Chadwell, founding partner of 1843 Capital. Any parting words?
No fear.
No fear. Yeah.